Yes, my name is Pat Clark, Patricia R. Clark, but I'm better known as Pat Clark. I was born and raised in Iowa Falls, and spent the first 18 years of my life in the city, and then I left to see the world. And I thought I'd start, Glow, if you agree, with I've written something about growing up in a small town of Iowa. It'll give people an idea about me and my background in this small town. And then we'll take it from there, okay?
That sounds great.
Okay. I'm doing these articles for for a purpose about my life, and I did this one recently called "Growing Up in a Small Town in Iowa." April 25th, 1926, Milan, Italy. It is the opening night at La Scala. The La Scala Opera House, and Puccini's opera Turandot is being presented for the first time under the direction of Maestro Arturo Toscanini. About the same time, on the other side of the ocean, another not-so-dramatic event was occurring in a small town in Iowa, as that was the day I was born. No doubt I was singing an aria of my own. For the next 18 years, I would live in Iowa Falls, located on the Iowa River, with my parents and my twin brothers, Don and Dwayne. The one thing I remember while growing up in the Midwest was that the four seasons were so distinct. I loved those beautiful summer days because, for one thing, there was no school. The town was surrounded by fields of Iowa corn that grew as high as an elephant's eye. In those days, before air conditioning, it got awfully hot in Iowa, so hot that they claimed you could hear the corn grow. I went barefooted all the time, and by the time summer ended, the bottom of my feet were like leather. In fact, I could even walk on cinders. I learned to swim in the muddy Iowa River. My cousin's Grandpa Willie, who immigrated to Iowa from Germany just after the turn of the century, taught us all how to swim. He allegedly swam the English Channel. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but he was a good teacher. At least none of us drowned. My childhood friend, Ruthie Ness, had a sister who married a farmer, a first-generation Dane, and each summer Ruthie and I would spend 2 weeks on their farm. What fun it was to help feed the chickens, gather fresh eggs, slop the hog, ride the big work horses, and play in the hayloft of the barn. The food on the farm was so fresh and tasted so good, all homegrown. I remember one Saturday evening, several of the neighboring farmers came for a visit, and all were seated around the big kitchen table talking Danish. I sat listening to them, completely fascinated by the strange language that I could not understand. Little did I realize at the time that I would someday live in that beautiful country of Denmark. Suddenly the summer passes, it is fall, time for the harvest, and school is about to begin. I remember so vividly the changing colors of the trees, so beautiful. It was in the fall. It was in the fall of October 1936, to be exact, that I experienced death for the first time. My beautiful Aunt Anne, only 36 years old, died as a result of a botched operation, leaving my 4 cousins and Uncle Frank grief-stricken. In those days, the coffin bearing the remains was brought into the home for viewing. I remember going to their home, and I did not want to see Aunt Anne, but my Uncle Joe forced me over to the casket anyway. To this day, I refuse to review the remains of deceased relatives or friends. Growing up with 2 brothers, I was always involved in sports, playing softball, basketball, and football. Yes, I played football. I was such a tomboy. None of us kids could afford a football, but that did not stop us. We merely rolled up a bunch of old rags, tied them together, and that was a football. It didn't bounce, but it sure flew through the air. I remember one of the happiest times of my life was when I was selected to be on the first team of the Iowa Falls girls basketball team when I was in high school. That meant that I got to travel with the team to nearby towns such as Eldora, Owassa, Wellsburg, and Steamboat Rock. Exciting stuff when you have never traveled before. Fall passes, and before you know it, we are experiencing the first snowstorm of the season. Winter has arrived. How wonderful it was to wake up in the morning, look out the window, and see a winter wonderland. I could hardly wait to get outside and play in it. When you are a kid, you can play in the snow for hours and never feel the cold. I grew up during the Depression years of the 1930s and the early 1940s. My dad was out of work for 7 years, but did part-time jobs, whatever he could find, just to earn some dollars to support it. One of the toughest times for the Clark family happened in February 1935, when the chief of police and the owner of the house where we were living on Iowa Street came to the door to inform us that we were being evicted as we could not pay the rent. My dad was not there, just my mom, my 2 brothers, and me. I remember all 4 of us crying as all, and I do mean all, of our possessions were taken out of the house and placed on the front yard, which was icy and snowy. It was a frightening experience for young kids. We went to my Uncle Joe and Aunt Bessie's house to live until Dad was able to rent our house next to the Oak Street Bridge where we lived until I left Iowa Falls. Many years later, when I had a good job with the State Department, I told my brother to let me know if that house ever came up for sale. If it did, I wanted to buy it and burn it to the ground. Fortunately, it never did. The winters could be very long and hard during those tough years when I was growing up, but suddenly, before you knew it, you see your first robin, the buds are coming out on the trees, and spring has arrived. Spring is my favorite time of the year, as everything is so alive and the world blossoms before your eyes. For 18 years, I experienced the colorful seasons of Iowa. In spite of the depression and hard times my parents were experiencing, I was basically a happy kid and did not realize how tough things were for them until I got older. Their aim was to get us 3 kids through high school, as neither one of them were able to graduate. It happened. My brothers graduated in 1943, and both went immediately into the service, Dwayne in the Army and Don in the Navy. I managed to squeak through school year after year, graduating the end of May 1944. The war was still raging. My brothers, several cousins, and my uncle were all in the military, serving in various parts of the world. My mother was working for a company that made military uniforms, and my 2 aunts were working in a munitions plant. Once I got out of school, I knew I wanted to leave Iowa Falls. Our class song was sung to the tune of Tea for Two. Who is at Queen Fortune's door? It's the merry class of '44. Our class motto was, we have crossed the bay, the ocean lies before us. Never looking back, I left my little hometown for the big city of Des Moines, where I got my first job with the Western Union Telegraph Company. From there, I went on to travel the world. I have crossed the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean so many times that I have lost count. Here it is, 65 years later, and I'm now living in a wonderful retirement community in Northern California, surrounded by good friends and caring people. Yes, I can certainly say that I have lived the American dream when you consider my start in life. Looking back, I can truly say that I've had a wonderful life. And it ain't over with yet. L'chaim, to life. Thank you.
Oh, Pat, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
That was fun to write, and it's. I have very strong roots to this little city where I grew up, and I always come back to it, as my friend Ruthie can attest to. I think I've come back practically every year since I left. My brother Dwayne lived here for a number of years after he got out of the service. He had a horrible time during the war. He was sent down to Jacksonville, Florida for 3 months of basic training, then shipped over to the front lines of Italy. He was wounded, and then he recuperated in a hospital in Rome, and when he was well enough, they put him back in the front lines, and he was captured in the Po Valley along with about, I guess, 80 of his buddies. They were all captured, and then Dwayne was sent by train up to a prisoner of war camp, Stalag 7A, outside of Munich, where he spent the remainder of the war until they were liberated in the spring of 1945. And then he came home to Iowa Falls, and he basically said, I ain't going nowhere, I'm staying here. He did go to California for a very brief period of time, but he spent most of the rest of his life in Iowa Falls until he went down to be near his son in North Carolina, where he died. But both of my brothers are gone. Don came home after the service, but he, like me, he traveled, married and traveled, had a child. Dwayne married to my sister-in-law Vivian, and they had a son, David, and my brother Don and his wife Mary had my niece, Sherry. And anyway, Don traveled a lot in the United States, came over and visited me in several places when I lived abroad. But we all had our connections, our feelings for Iowa Falls, and and of course I was delighted to donate my collection to the city that has really taken that collection to its heart. When it all happened in 1997, when I came to Iowa Falls, and I said to my sister-in-law Mary, who was living here after her husband, my brother Don, died, and I said, I've got all this artwork. I said, what am I going to do with it? And I said, maybe I should give it to City Hall. And then we concluded, well, the City Hall's not big enough for what I have. And Mary said, well, why don't you donate it to the Ellsworth College? She said they have an art department. And so anyway, I called Laura Hamilton. She was on one of the trustees, I guess, and proposed it to her. And she said, oh, Pat, that sounds like a wonderful idea. And so she proposed it to the board, and they wanted to know if there was an appraisal, if the artwork had been appraised. And at that point it had not. And I said, no, but I'll see what I can do. And just to show you how fortunate this whole business of this art collection has been, when I got back to Paris, I was living in Paris at the time, I was retired from the State Department. Just by chance I saw an ad for an appraiser who had an American who had an office in Paris because he was married to a French woman. He also had an office in Essex, Massachusetts. So I contacted him, and he did the appraisal. I sent this wonderful booklet to the college, and boy, they were excited. They said, of course. And then about the same time, there again, the luck of it all, that the old Carnegie Ellsworth building, where I spent so many hours of my life when I was a kid, was empty because they built the new library, and so that building was empty. And I remember suggesting when I was home that they turn that into a cultural center, and by heavens, it came to pass. I mean, I guess there were lots of meetings and talk about it, but yes, the city decided they would take that beautiful old building, and at one point they talked about tearing it down, horrors, but they didn't, fortunately. And then they did. They just got well, there was a man from the Minneapolis Institute of Art, Neil Cocklerline was his name, and they brought him down to look at the building. They also brought an architect down, and to Iowa Falls rather, to see if it was structurally sound. And anyway, Neil Cocklerline wrote a very long letter just saying this is a perfect building, and the architects gave it their blessing, and then the city went to work, and they were able to get, I think, something like $800,000 and renovated that building and made it into a little museum. And my heavens, it all just like it was meant to be. It all just fell into place, and then I shipped the collection in January of 2003, and it all arrived safely, and the city just went to work, the foundation building, and also then we'd have lunch at a great Chinese restaurant in her area. And so the day arrived, and I ran downstairs and I opened up my mailbox, and I had a letter from the college, the Ellsworth College Foundation, and I read it, and then I always carry a green tote bag. In fact, I even have it here now. Where is it? This one right here. I always carry this. I got it in London many years ago, and anyway, I had that, and so I just casually threw the letter into my green Heron's tote bag, and had my umbrella and my bottle of water, which I always carried, and off I went to the 3rd arrondissement, where my friend lived. We watched the wonderful Chinese parade. It was, you know, all the dragons and the floats, and one of the floats, they were throwing these good luck envelopes that always have a little coin in them, and they were throwing those off into the crowd. And anyway, the parade ended, and so we went off and had the wonderful Chinese lunch. Then I went back to my house over in the 5th arrondissement on the left bank, and I took the stuff out of my tote bag, and I pulled that letter out from the foundation that I had received that morning, and I looked at it, and something was in there, and I opened it, I poured it out, you know, and it was one of these Chinese good luck envelopes. Had literally, when it was tossed, it went into my tote bag and into, apparently the letter was upright, and right into the envelope containing the letter from the Ellsworth College Foundation. And I said to myself, now if that isn't a good luck omen, I don't know what is. And of course, it's all been very fortunate and lucky. Everything fell into place, the grand opening, etc. But anyway, I just have not touched on my career at all. I've been very lucky in my career. I'm a high school graduate, as I said. I started out as a teletype operator with Western Union Telegraph Company. Ruth Ness, she was Ruth Wickham in those days, and she later became a shirt-tail relative of mine when she married my cousin. Anyway, Ruthie and I got the job with Western Union in Des Moines, and one of the reasons I wanted the job was because they were training people to work in their large offices all over the United States. Ruthie and I ended up working in Chicago for a while and in Cleveland for a while. Then Ruthie quit her job because she married my cousin, and I kept